Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa mawala ma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yusufullah here. So we're now moving in to our third week of class, and we are about to wrap up our introductory theory, our 4% of the language that gives you over half of all your benefits. And at this stage, I think we've done a pretty good job explaining how the language works and how in Arabic the majority of the meanings, they don't come from the letters or the vocabulary, but instead the majority of the meanings, they come from the vowels and the patterns, and in the case of sentences, from the grammatical structures. So in the case of words, we have the letters, the consonants combining together and giving us meaning, and then since letters are not pronounceable, we need vowels. So when the vowels come, they not only make the words pronounceable, but they give us more meaning. So that was all explained in the first week of class, and we used the istansaru example to really highlight the point that what looks like a single structure can end up giving you up to 7 meanings. Okay, this was further developed in the second week, where we showed you how when words are combined together, you start off with maybe 2 meanings. Each of the words is giving you an individual meaning, but then when you combine them together in a method that's sanctioned by the language, then you end up with more than what you started off with. Okay, so that's true at the phrase level, and it's also true at the sentence level. And we spoke about how the Arabic language has a particular mechanism in order to differentiate between grammatical meanings. So if you have a verb and 2 nouns lined up together, then some languages distinguish between the subject and the object by introducing extra words, and other languages do it by sequencing the words so that the word at the front automatically becomes the subject, and then the word that's delayed automatically becomes the object. So that's rigid, and it doesn't give you too many ways to express the meaning. Arabic has its own method, which is different than every other language, and that is done by giving the last letters of the isms particular voweling. So when you see the dhamma at the end of the ism, you know that this ism is the one doing the verb, and when you see the other vowel, then you know that this ism is the one upon whom the verb is being done. Okay, so that was all explained thoroughly in the second week, and then we spoke about the 2 types of sentences that fundamentally in Arabic, because the doer of the verb must follow the verb, this results in sentences that begin with verbs. In English, this can happen. In English, regardless of what kind of predicate you're dealing with, the noun will always be at the front. But in Arabic, since it's possible for a verb to initiate a sentence, so that's why we have an entire sentence that's called a verbal sentence. So the grammar people, they took the generic term subject and predicate, and depending on what kind of sentence you're dealing with, they gave us more specific terms. So the portions of the nominal sentence are called mubtada and khabar, and the portions of the verbal sentence are called fi'l and fa'il. Okay, so in week 2 the sentence was introduced, but at a very basic level, and obviously we know that a verbal sentence does not need to be 2 words, it could be much larger. The reason is because when any event occurs, there's always details regarding the verb that might be relevant and the speaker might want to express, like the when and the where and the how and the why. So depending on how many details the speaker chooses to express, the sentence can become very large. There's really no limit to the length of a verbal sentence. Okay, so when you have a long verbal sentence, then you have to be able to determine the roles of the various major portions within the sentence, so you can clearly identify the subject from the object from the various types of adverbs. Okay, so in this presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to revisit this topic of grammatical states, the process, the one that was likened to human emotions and facial expressions. We're going to bring it back, and we're going to further develop it, and we're going to remove one major inaccuracy that we did not deal with in week 1 on purpose, because the objective in week 1 was to introduce the topic for the first time and to highlight comprehensiveness, and also to create a mental imprint, so you understand very clearly what rafa, nasab and jar are, which are these 3 words by far are the most important words in all of grammar: rafa, nasab and jar. And when you take the rafa, the nasab and the jar, and you line them up with the he, the him and the his, then that gives you a very clear understanding of it. Okay, and then when you follow up with the house example, the house fell, I entered the house, door of the house, then that that gives you even more clarity. Okay, but there's still a gap. Okay, because subject, object, and possessive is not all there is. That analogy in that example sort of suggests that subject, object, and possessive, because that's what you think when you hear he, him, and his, right? Okay, but obviously the ism is much more broad than that. And the ism is extremely broad because not only does it include nouns and pronouns, it also includes adjectives and adverbs. Okay, so the whole point behind this presentation, 3.1, is to further develop the uses of the ism. Okay, invalidate the restriction within 3. The impression that one would get from just hearing that analogy, the facial expressions one, and the he, him, and his association. From that, the beginner would sort of think that subject, object, possessive. Okay, the ism could be used in 3 ways. We have 3 states. Each one corresponds, and that's how we tell between subject, object, and possessive. But obviously that can't be true, because the ism is much more broad. Because the ism is much more broad than just subject, object, and possessive. So we're going to come to a total. Okay, and then we're going to develop a great majority of those in this presentation alone. Okay, and this is like 30% of the entire science of grammar. We're going to tackle it in this single presentation, and inshallah in the 3.2, the second presentation of week 3, we'll speak purely about the mudari verb, which is the second of the major verbs, the one that begins with the yaf, taf, af, or naf, has a special letter at the front, indicates on both present and future. So there will be a separate presentation where we'll do with that what we did with the madi, in other words, fill the slots. So we'll have our table of 14, the same table that was introduced in the first week, and we're going to start filling those slots and developing the verb, constructing it conjugation by conjugation. So when you watch the second video of week 3, I'm hopeful that by the time you're finished with that presentation, you will have memorized the entire mudari verb. So once you are armed with the possible usages of the ism, the majority of them, and you know both the madi and the mudari, then this is pretty much all you need in order to begin reading. Now more could be said. Like, I can keep teaching you grammar for like a longer period of time, but the thing is, you don't need that to begin reading. Okay, so our whole purpose in these 3 weeks is to give you the minimum amount, not the maximum. We want to give you the minimum amount in order to just reach that milestone. Once we've reached that milestone, then we can fill the gaps of an understanding as the book proceeds. Okay, so it's a big feat, alhamdulillah. It's a big milestone that we've reached. Okay, and we're very close to beginning the reading text now. So you know, I'd like to congratulate you for getting this far, and let's proceed with today's presentation. So we'll quickly remind you about the analogies, the 2 analogies, the human emotions one, the facial the English pronouns one, and then we'll highlight the inaccuracy. In other words, I'll actually come out and tell you what that inaccuracy was in week 1, and then I'll invalidate that, and then I'll provide the solution. Okay, which would be developing the usages of the ism. So there's the breakdown of today's presentation. So let's proceed. Okay, so human beings experience emotional states. People make us happy, angry, sad, frustrated, shy, embarrassed. It happens because of interaction with other humans. So people treat us in certain ways, and sometimes they fulfill our expectations. They do what we expect them to do, and this causes us to become happy. Other times they disappoint us, and we become upset. And all of these emotions are then expressed on our faces. So by looking at the human being's face, you can tell what emotion they're experiencing. Arabic words behave in a similar fashion. Words influence words. They interact with one another, and words put the words that come after them in particular grammatical states. These states are then reflected on the last letter. So by looking at the last letter of the nouns, you can tell what state the noun is experiencing. So we have dhamma, which reflects one of the states. We have fatha, which reflects another, and we have kasa, which reflects the third state. And unlike human emotions, which are endless, the grammatical states in Arabic are total 4. There's only 4, and from those 4, we're focusing on 3 of them. And these are the 3 that the ism experiences, and the 3 correspond to 3 English pronouns. So here are the names of the states: Rafa, Nasab, and Jar. And Rafa corresponds to he, Nasab corresponds to him, and Jar corresponds to his. So if you know the difference between those 3 variations of the English pronoun, then that will take you 60-70% of the way towards understanding exactly what Rafa, Nasab, and Jar are. Okay, so why do they have three in English? The reason is because the pronoun could be used in different ways. He, him, and his. They all mean the same thing. They're all referring to one male in the third person. So when you're speaking about a male in the third person, sometimes you say he, sometimes you say him, and sometimes you say his. So why do they have three? The reason is because the pronoun could be used in different ways. I'll say that one more time. The reason is because the pronoun could be used in different ways. Depending on how the pronoun is used, you would need to choose the correct one. So if the pronoun is intended to be subject of the verb, you would say he came. When the pronoun is intended to be object of the verb, you would say I saw him. And when the pronoun is intended to be part of a possessive structure, you would say his pen. This in English only happens in pronouns. You don't see this happening in nouns. So regardless of how a noun in English is used within a sentence, the noun will always look the same. This is important. The noun will always look the same. But in Arabic, this process of a single meaning looking different, a single word looking different depending on how it's used, happens in isms, the majority of isms. And the difference is not in the whole word, it's only in the last letter. So again, human emotions, facial expressions. So the last letter of the word would change, and that last letter would tell you the state that the ism is being used in. And the need and necessity behind this process is because without this, there would be mass confusion. Without this, we would not be able to tell the role that the noun is playing, because sequence is not doing it for us, as was explained in week 2. Okay, so let's bring back the house example and let's continue with this. So here's the house example. Okay, so when a house is doing something and it's the subject of the verb, first of all, it will be brought after the verb. Okay, and you know this now from week 2, that saqat al-baytu would be the way you say it. The house fell down. Okay, secondly, the last letter of the word house would have a dhamma, because this is a subject. This is the noun being used as a subject, so it's the equivalent of the he in English. So we would say saqat al-baytu. And if they ask you what state is the word house in, the answer would be it's in the state of rafa. How is the rafa being reflected? It's being reflected with the dhamma. Okay, in the second example, we have the verb and the subject together written as a single word, and that's conjugation number 13, dakhaltu. The example could easily be changed to dakhalta al-bayta, you entered the house. Dakhalti al-bayta, if you're speaking to a female, you entered the house. Dakhal al-bayta, or whatever the case may be. The point is the word house is being used differently here than it was in the top example. In the top example, it was the doer of the verb, so therefore it had a dhamma on the last letter to reflect that. And in the second example, the action is happening to the house, and the house has a different ending. And in the third example, we have possessive. And this was the phrase was introduced to you in week 2, when you get two nouns and the two nouns have an association between them, apostrophe s, or the two nouns are associated together, like Zayd's book was the example given over there, and here we have the example babul bayti, the door, the house's door, or the door of the house. So al baytu, al bayta, al bayti. So look in the column in the middle that says subject, object, possessive. So you make that association. So we have a couple of associations here. First of all, rafa is reflected with dhamma, nasab is reflected with fatha, and jar is reflected with kasra. Is that 100% accurate? Okay, now we have some advanced students, some intermediate students, people that have been studying for a long time, and they know that dhamma, fatha, and kasra is the dominant reflection. The what? The dominant reflection. Like 80-90% of the time, rafa is reflected with dhamma. 80-90% of the time, nasab is reflected with fatha, and 80-90% of the time, jar is reflected with kasra. So how about the other 10-20? How about the other 10-20? Obviously, I'm suppressing it. I'm not talking about it on purpose. I'm not telling you about the entire discussion, because as you start seeing this in the book, you're gonna see the 10-20 pop up every now and then in the book. You'll see a word that clearly you're identifying it to be in rafa, but it doesn't have a dhamma. Or you see a word that's following a preposition. There's no question that this word is in jar. Okay? Or you see a jar, you see a word that's the second half of a possessive phrase, and you can tell clearly that that's true, because the first word doesn't have al, it doesn't have tanween, and all of the requirements for that possessive phrase are all being met, and yet the word doesn't have a kasra. The second word, it doesn't have a kasra. So how could that be? How could a word be in jar and not have kasra? So for now, I'm just telling you that there's a 10-20% likelihood that might not be. There'll be a mismatch between the state and the vowel. Now, how do you understand that? How do you understand that? So it would be like happiness being reflected with a smile. Okay, but certain times people, they don't smile. They're happy and they express their happiness through some other method. Like they cry, for example. So different method of reflection. Okay, what do you call that? You call that different method of reflection. So now I can lead with that topic. Okay, but I choose not to. I choose to introduce that topic at a later time in week 5, in week 6, when you start seeing numerous examples of mismatches. At that point, I'll give you the entire topic. I'll give you the entire discussion on that. Okay, so there's some inaccuracy in the two columns on the right side. Okay, the association that you're seeing, Rafa reflected with Dhamma, Nasab reflected with Fatha, and Jar reflected with Kasra. This is true the majority of the time. The second association you're seeing on the slide right now is Rafa is associated to subject, Nasab is associated to object, and Jar is possessive. So you can see they're lined up together. Okay, so what we're going to tell you in this presentation, you see, I'm not going to hold back on this topic. I'm going to tell you right now that Rafa does not mean subject, Nasab does not mean object, and Jar does not mean possessive. Okay, in other words, they don't equal each other. But instead, subject is an example of Rafa, object is an example of Nasab, and Jar is an example of possessive. Okay, why do I say that? I say that because if you restrict Rafa, Nasab, and Jar to subject, object, possessive, then essentially what you're claiming is that the ism could be used in 3 total ways. The ism could only be used in 3 ways. One of them is called Rafa, the other one's called Nasab, the third one's called Jar, subject, object, possessive, but that can't be true. That can't be true. Let me tell you why. Because subject here is in the meaning of doer. And remember that distinction also from last week, that when I use the word subject, sometimes I mean subject as opposed to predicate. In other words, mubtada, and other times I mean subject as opposed to doer of a verb. Okay, and that's the meaning intended here on the slide. Okay, so subject, object, both of those presuppose that there's a verb. You're not going to have a doer of a verb unless you have a verb. You're not going to have an object unless you have a verb. So both of those, subject and object, presuppose that there's a verb, and we already told you last week that there's many sentences that don't even have verbs. So what are you going to have? You're not going to have subject and object. You're going to have something other than these two. You're going to have mubtada and khabar. Mubtada is other than subject, object, possessive. Khabar is other than subject, object, possessive. So we're already at 5. We're already at 5 possible usages for the ism. So the number is much larger than 3. Okay? So this is the topic of the presentation. I'm not going to rush it. Inshallah, I'm going to try to take my time and develop it properly. And if you want, you can watch the presentation multiple times. Okay, and that's the benefit of the technology. We're able to do that. And I'll try to preempt what kind of questions students have in their minds. And if I miss something, then my first recommendation would be to try to listen to it a couple of times, write it out, and be a little resourceful instead of just asking straight away. And then in the live session you can ask your questions, and there's no bar against that. Let's continue. Okay, so we start off with 3. Okay, and this was the analogy. This was the first introduction of the topic, your first exposure at this topic through the analogy. Okay, it gave the impression that the ism could be used in 3 ways. So let's list those 3 first, and then we'll give you some idea of how the number is much larger. So subject as in doer of the verb. That's one possible usage for an ism. Zayd went. Okay, object, Zayd hit Amr. So that Amr word there at the end is an ism and it's being used as an object. Very clear. Possessive is like Zayd's book. The second word, Zayd, is being used as part of a possessive phrase. Other than that, we have the Jumla Ismiya. Don't forget the Jumla Ismiya. The 2 halves of the Jumla Ismiya can be considered a possible usage number 4 and a possible usage number 5. So we have the subject of the nominal sentence is a 4th usage for the ism. The predicate of the nominal sentence is a 5th usage for the ism. It's other than the initial 3. Okay, and then coming after a preposition, it would be an ism that comes after the preposition, like with the pen, or in the house, or to the masjid, or on the roof. Okay, or whatever. Like many examples can be given, and prepositions are always coupled with isms. So coming after a preposition can be considered a 6th possible usage for an ism. And then we have numerous types of adverbs, and this is specific to verbal sentences. In a verbal sentence, the bare minimum is the fi'l and the fa'il. Like you can't have a verbal sentence unless you have those 2 words. But then it doesn't need to stop there, because depending on the meaning of the verb, you can also have an object. Some verbs won't have that, like sitting and standing does not have an object. Zayd stood, the meaning is complete. Zayd sat, the meaning is complete. But hitting and helping, you would expect there to be a third word in the sentence, and that third word is an object. Okay, but beyond that, depending on relevance, the speaker might choose to express further details of the event. Okay, he might want to speak about when the event occurred. So today, Zayd hit Amr today. So the word today is an additional word, so it's caused the sentence to become larger, and we're going to call that an adverb of time. Okay, and also it could be the answer to the question where. So when, where, how, why. Okay, so when, where, how, why are details of the verb that if they're relevant, the speaker might want to express them. So the question is, how would the speaker do that? The speaker would do that by bringing isms, because an ism not only includes noun and pronoun, but it also includes adverb. Remember that? And this entire presentation is about the possible uses of the ism. You see that? So add that on, and our number becomes even larger. It's now closer to 10, because there's already like 6 on the board. After a preposition is the sixth one, and then we have these numerous types of adverbs that will cause our number to reach 10. So the question is, what's the grand total? How many possible ways can an ism be used in a sentence? And the answer is 22. 22 possible usages for the ism. And let me tell you, the 132-page best book in the world for grammar, 1/3 of that book is devoted to developing these 22 places. 1/3. So what we are giving you in this presentation is 1/3 of all of grammar. It's extremely dense. This is an important presentation, and it's one of those that you would want to watch again and again. And don't worry if it's still abstract. Okay, I'm going to give you examples for each one, inshallah, the ones that I develop. But then if you want more examples, then you don't have to wait long, because within week 3 itself, we're going to begin the stories of the Prophet's book, and then you're going to see more examples than you can handle, inshallah, when that book begins. The focus right now needs to be on beginning that book on time. Okay, and I think I've already spoken about that a couple of places, the method, like the approach. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so first of all, why is that number so large? Okay, why 22? So let's give you some idea of why it's so large. Because the ism is very broad. Not only does it include nouns and pronouns, but it also includes adjectives and adverbs. And the way an adverb occurs within a sentence is radically different than how a noun occurs. Okay, and you probably can appreciate that, because what is a noun? A noun is an entity. Okay, and a noun has the capacity to become a doer of a verb. Like Zayd's a noun, Amr's a noun. And nouns have the capacity to become object. Nouns have the capacity to become mubtada, the primary portion of a nominal sentence. It must be an entity. Now, a pronoun is very similar to a noun. It's just a smaller version of it. So instead of Zayd came, it says he came, or I hid him. So there's not much discussion there about nouns and pronouns. The adjective's usage is radically different, because the adjective would become predicate. For example, Zayd is tall. Or you can use it as part of a phrase to modify a noun, or you can use it as a description, sentence level, phrase level. Adverbs are brought in verbal sentences to modify the verb. And this would be the answer to the question when, where, how, and why. So keep in mind that it's the ism doing all of this. That's the whole point. The whole point of the presentation is that it's the ism conveying all of these meanings. So obviously the number is going to be large based on the broadness of the ism itself. Second factor, okay, notice that the grammar people took the generic terms, subject and predicate, and they came up with 4 more specific terms based on the kind of sentence you're dealing with. So that we have specific terminology for each kind of sentence. The portions of the verbal sentence are labeled differently, and the portions of the nominal sentence are labeled differently. All of those labels is what we're going to talk about today. You see that? So this is another factor that causes our number to become large. The fact that we have 2 kinds of sentences, and the portions of each of these 2 kinds of sentences have different labels. Okay, now let's get a little more specific now. First of all, in a verbal sentence, you're going to have a subject. Obviously, like without that, you can't have a verbal sentence, and that would be the fa'il, what we call fa'il, and that's the who. Okay? Okay, many verbs also have an object. Not every verb. Sitting and standing won't have an object, but hitting and helping would. Okay, so just follow with this. I'm listing a whole bunch of them, and I'm going to try to get to a large number, and then I'm going to tie it all up together, inshallah, and I'll distribute them on Rafa, Nasab, and Jar. Because the whole point is that Rafa does not mean subject, Nasab does not mean object, and Jar does not mean possessive, but rather, subject is an example of Rafa, and there's more. Nasab is an example, object is an example of Nasab, and there's more than that. Okay, because the total number we're dealing with is 22. And those 22 need to be distributed on Rafa, Nasab, and Jar. Okay, so back to the verbal sentence. So at the very front of the sentence will be the verb, and that's not part of the discussion. We're not talking about the verb. We're talking about what follows the verb. So the first thing you'd expect there to be after the verb would be the who, the doer. We call that subject. Second, for many verbs, you'd also have an object. So that's another noun added to the sentence. We're at 3 words now, verb plus 2 nouns. Apart from that, verbs could be passive. And when a verb is passive, what that means is that the doer is suppressed, there's no doer anymore, and instead the object occupies the place of the doer, and now it's the subject of the sentence in the sense that it is musnad ilayh. It's what's being talked about. The example is Zayd ate an apple. That's a normal sentence where apple is object, but if you take away Zayd, then it becomes the apple was eaten. Notice the ending. The ending on the word apple on the left side is fatha. So if they ask you what state is the word apple in, the answer is nasab. It's like I entered the house. It's an example of object. But in the other example, this same object becomes primary. Okay, because Zayd's missing, right? So something has to replace Zayd, so the apple replaces Zayd, and now all of the focus is on the apple. The apple was eaten, and the ending changed. So we're going to consider that an additional usage for the ism, and we're going to give it a name. Let's call it deputy doer. Okay, because the real doer is gone. So now what was previously object occupies the place of the subject, and the name changes. We don't call it fa'il anymore. We call it na'ib fa'il. Na'ib means deputy. Na'ib fa'il, deputy doer. Okay, so we have fa'il, we have maf'ul bihi. Okay, that was a little premature because I haven't given you the term maf'ul bihi anyway. It's going to come later on the upcoming slides. Object. Third is the deputy doer. Okay, so those are 3 possible usages for the ism, because it's the ism that will be those 3 things: the who, the what, and the deputy doer. Other than that, we can have different kinds of adverbs, which I've already alluded to: when, where, how, why. Okay, so those adverbs are now here on the screen, 4 of them. If it's generic, without any time connotation, without any place connotation, reason, cause, why, how, none of that, just modifying the muster meaning within the verb. In other words, the action component of the verb. I became very happy. I became extremely happy. So that's a possible usage. Okay, so it has a name which we'll give to you as we move forward with the presentation. And then we have the adverb of time and place, the when and the where. The grammar people, they combine the 2 together, and the example is the word today. In the example, Zayd hit Amr today. ضرب اليوم زيد عمرا. Okay, and then we have the reason and cause. So I hit him for the purpose of discipline. So that word ta'diban is an adverb of reason and cause. It's telling us the reason why the action occurred. And this in English doesn't exist, because in English, if you want to indicate the reason of an action, you have to use more than 1 word. You can't do it in a single word. You have to say for discipline. But in Arabic, you can do it in a single word. So you can consider that an example of comprehensiveness at the same time. And then we have the circumstantial adverb, how the action occurred. The answer to the question how, Zayd came to me riding. So the word riding, rakiban, in the example we're seeing on the screen. So add that to the list. We're very close to 10 at this stage right now. Okay, the next one is coming after a preposition, fil bayti, and this is all happening within verbal sentences. All of the usages I've listed up until now, let's count them again: the who, which we call fa'il, the what, which is the object. Okay, and then we have the deputy doer in the case of a passive verb, and then we have the 4 adverbs that were listed on the previous screen, previous slide. So now we're at 7, and then this is our 8th one, object of a preposition. And all 8 of those will be found where? They'll be found in verbal sentences. You'll expect to see them in verbal sentences, because they all presuppose an action occurring. Isn't that right? Like it's an action. You're giving the reason why an action occurred. You're talking about the place, the where and the when of an action. You're modifying the action using the word very, or the word quickly, or the word swiftly, like that. Okay, now how about nominal sentences? So first of all, nominal sentences have 2 major portions that were talked about in the previous week, and they are called mubtada and khabar. So So that's how they start off, mubtada and khabar. But then there's certain governing agents. Listen carefully, we're going to develop this towards the end of the presentation. There's certain governing agents that can come at the beginning of a nominal sentence. So what was previously mubtada is no longer mubtada because it's not at the front. Mubtada means it needs to be at the front. Instead of that, you have kana, or you have inna, or you have one of these abrogators. Certain governing agents come at the beginning of a nominal sentence and abrogate the sentence. So what used to be mubtada is no longer mubtada. What used to be khabar is no longer khabar, but we get different labels. So this causes our number to get even larger. So we were at 8, mubtada would be 9, khabar would be 10. And then when you take into account the abrogators, then you get even more. The number becomes larger. So certain governing agents can abrogate the sentence, and this will result in further usages. So again, the number is 22. Okay, I haven't ran through all 22. I've given you like more than half of them. So let's redevelop them and give you the Arabic terminology associated to each one. And I'm doing it in layers. So it's back to the onion thing, right? So every layer I'm revealing more of the system, because I want you by the end of this presentation to have retained the majority of what I talked about. When you see something being mentioned repeatedly, then the chances of retention are much higher. And then obviously you can go back and watch the video again if you need to. You can read the transcript that will be made available, inshallah, in a few days. So let's continue. Okay, so now since we have so many usages, 22, and the whole purpose of this process, like having grammatical states and having different endings, is to differentiate between them. So if the number is so large, so shouldn't we have a larger number of grammatical states to account for those 22 possible usages? That's the question. So the question is, how do we distinguish between the different usages of the ism? Okay, first of all, we don't need 22 different endings, and we don't need 22 different grammatical states. The reason is because the type of word will oftentimes distinguish between the role. Like for example, if you have, okay, this is a very clear example. If you have a verb, 2 nouns and an adverb, or more, like if you, according to our terminology, you'd have a fi'l and 3 isms. A fi'l and 3 isms. But then from those 3 isms, 2 of them are entities and 1 of them is an attribute. Okay, like Zayd hit Amr viciously, or you can say that Zayd hit Amr today. So the word today is not an entity. The word today. So it's not a candidate. It can't be the subject. Isn't that right? So now if Zayd and Amr had the same ending, there would be confusion. If Zayd and Amr had the same ending, we would not know which of those 2 nouns is the one doing the verb and which of those 2 nouns is the object of the verb, because sequence does not determine the grammar. So there's a likelihood, there's a likelihood that Zayd could be the object, the subject. There's also a likelihood that it could be the other way around, that Amr is the subject and Zayd is the object, and we really have no way of knowing. Okay, but the word today is clearly the answer to the question when. It's the kind of word sort of gives it away. So now if al-yawm has the same ending as Amr, there's no confusion in that. We can recycle the same ending more than once. You see? What would be problematic is if Zayd and Amr had the same ending. So the type of word a lot of the times narrows it down. Okay. Now the type of sentence that the word is in also narrows it down. Because the first portion of the nominal sentence is called mubtada, and the doer of the verb is called fa'il. If the mubtada and the fa'il have the same ending, this is not problematic because they won't line up side by side. You won't find them together. So there's no differentiating to do. It's the type of sentence differentiates it for you, right? You see? So this allows us to recycle the endings again. Okay. So the subject of the nominal and the subject of the verbal can easily have the same ending, and there will be no confusion because you won't see them occurring side by side. Again, if Zayd and Amr in a verbal sentence, the subject and the object had the same ending, that would be problematic because they are lining up side by side. Not only that, but they both have capacity to be subject and object. So over there, the endings need to be different in order to create the differentiation. So a lot of the time, the type of word allows for a reduction in the endings. We don't need 22 different endings. A smaller number will do. Similarly, the type of sentence sometimes distinguishes between the different usages. Okay, and then when all else fails, at that time, different endings would do it for you. So here's the point. The point is that Though the total amount of ways an ism can be used is 22, the amount of grammatical states and endings we need to resolve all confusion is just 3. We don't need 22 endings. What we need is we need the bare minimum that would allow us to remove all confusion, and that number happens to be 3. Okay, so now we've established a couple of things until this stage. First of all, the ism is extremely broad, and subject, object, possessive, which was the impression and the understanding that one got when hearing the analogy for the first time in week 1, that is not accurate. That is false. Okay, restricting the possible usages of the ism within 3 cannot be true, because all of that presupposes verb, and we have an entire other sentence out there that doesn't even have a verb. So clearly the portions of that sentence would be other than subject, object, possessive. So that would increase our number from 3, become at least 5. And then when we take into account the object of our preposition and the numerous types of adverbs, the number becomes even larger. When we take into account the abrogators and the governing agents that can come at the beginning of a nominal sentence and abrogate or change the term, what previously was mubtada is no longer mubtada, then that number becomes even larger. So the total number is 22. What we do not need is 22 different endings, because the type of word a lot of the times will give it away. So when you see Amr and the word today having the same ending, that's not a problem, because the word today cannot be the object, and Amr can't be the adverb. Amr is going to be the object, and the word today is going to be the adverb. So that allows the recycling of the endings, and then the two major sentences having the portions of each of those two sentences having different labels further allows recycling. So what we don't need is 22 different endings. What we do need is the bare minimum amount of endings that would allow for the removal of all confusion, and that number happens to be 3. So the only task at this stage right now is to assign the 22 on the 3. So we're going to distribute them, and here's how it is: 8, 12, and 2. 8, 12, and 2. So what is Rafa? Rafa is a broad grammatical state that accounts for 8 of the 22 possible ways an ism could be used. Subject is one of them. Nasab is an even broader grammatical state that accounts for 12 of the possible ways an ism could be used, and object happens to be an example of it. And jar, there's 2. There's 2 within jar. Second half of a possessive structure is one of them, and the second one we're going to give to you in a minute. So let's start wrapping this up now, tying it up. So we're going to begin with the jar category because it's the smallest. There's only 2. Okay, first, the first one you already know from week 2. The second half of a possessive phrase is fixed on jar. So if you have 2 nouns connected together in this particular phrase, then the second word will have a kasra, basically. And the example is Babul Baiti, door of the house. The example is actually just the second word. It's not the whole thing, it's the second word. But in order to highlight that, we listed both words, Babul Baiti. The word Bab's grammatical state is determined by how the phrase would then be used in a sentence. So if you say the door of the house broke, then in that case it will be Babul Baiti. If you want to say I opened the door of the house, in that case it will be Babal Baiti. And if you want to say in the door of the house, it will be Fi Babil Baiti. Or like the key of the door of the house, like Miftahu Babil Baiti, like that. Okay, so the example here is the word al-bayt, second half of a possessive structure. That's one of the positions of jar. The only other place in the language where an ism would be considered in the place of jar is if it follows a preposition. We call this object of a preposition. In Arabic it's called majroor. So mudaf ilayh. Okay, the word mudaf should have had an alif in the middle. Okay, I proofread these so much, but so inshallah when I give you the slides I'll fix that. There should have been an alif there. Mudaf ilayh. Okay, and then majroor is the second. Majroor is any ism that follows a preposition. Okay, and then you're gonna see all of these together inshallah on the final screen. Okay, how about Rafa? Okay, so subject of a nominal sentence like al-kitabu jadidun, the word al-kitabu, that's the place of Rafa. We call that mubtada. And predicate, the second half of a nominal sentence, is also in Rafa. If you remember from week 2, al-kitabu jadidun, we didn't say jadidan, we said jadidun. So that's also a place where you would put dhamma on the last letter of the ism, second half of a nominal sentence. And here the 2 having the same ending is not problematic, because the issue is not one of differentiating anyways. The issue is one of from where to where. And where to where is the subject, where to where is the predicate. So the endings could all be the same, and that's fine. Because because we will solve this problem not through endings. We will solve this problem through noting the association between the words. So when you're dealing with a long sentence, you would look from the first word and the second word, whether it has one of the phrase level relationships. If it does, then you move to the third word and keep looking for these phrase level relationships. Wherever they all exhaust, that's where the mubtada finishes, and that's where the predicate begins. Okay, so both of those are places of rafa, mubtada and khabar. Okay, the doer of a verb is called fa'il, and that's also a place of rafa. And the example is dhahaba zaydun. And the fourth one is deputy doer, and that was the apple example. The apple was eaten. Ukilat tufahu, and we call that naib fa'il. Okay, again, it's inverted. Naib should have been there, and fa'il should have been there. You see, I'm not going to redo this presentation. Like I've already made a couple of retakes on it, so I'm going to have to fix that in the slides that you get to that are given to you. Okay, let's move forward with the places of jar. Okay, so we start off with the object, which was the initial example that was given to you in the house. I entered the house. So that's called maf'ul bihi, object. And then generic adverb, and the example of that was farihtu kathiran. The word kathiran, I became very happy. And when I say generic, I mean that there's no time connotation, there's no place connotation, there's no reason why, and there's also no how. Okay, so it's modifying the action aspect of the verb without alluding to any of those four factors that I mentioned. That's called maf'ul mutlaq. Mutlaq means unconditional, absolute. Okay, don't worry too much about the Arabic terms. Okay, yeah, we'll give you. We have this sheet that we provide to the students where all of the terminology that was given in the 3 weeks is all listed for you. Arabic term, English equivalent. Arabic term, English equivalent, and it's like a single sheet, and you can just print that out and go through it a few times. But that's not what's gonna help you remember it. What will help you remember it is the repeated occurrences of these structures in the stories of the Prophet's book. Because after today, it's not going to be just grammar theory. It's going to be 50-50. Half of our time will be spent on giving you new grammar theory, and the other half will be spent on reading vocabulary and implementing or seeing the application of everything that was taught. So right now you might have some difficulty retaining these terms, but that is totally fine. Okay, we don't expect you to be able to rattle them off, like, from memory. That's not the point. And I don't want you thinking that's the point either. Okay, I just want you to understand the big picture, and when it becomes, when it becomes like concerning, at that point we'll let you know. If you can't do it then you should start worrying. And let me tell you, by that time you will be able to do it. Okay, so we have the object called maf'ul bihi, we have the generic adverb, which is the maf'ul mutlaq, and now we're going to move on to the where, when one, and the time and place one, and that one's called maf'ul fi. Okay, after that we have the reason and cause one, the one that in English should have existed but doesn't. Okay, for the purpose of discipline. The example was, I hit him for the purpose of discipline. That's called maf'ul lahu. And then the circumstantial one, the how one, Zayd came to me riding, that one's called hal. Okay, so we had 2 in jar, we had 4 in rafa, and now we have 5 in nasab. So the entire jar category is closed. Half of the rafa one's closed because total in rafa was 8. 4 of them have been given to you, and 5 of the nasab have been given, so we're at 11. Okay, now remember I said that at the beginning of a jumla ismiya, certain governing agents can come at the beginning and change the terminology, because first of all, kana is a verb, so you're not going to call that word that follows kana mubtada. If anything, you're going to call it a fa'il. But since kana is special, the subject of kana is not called fa'il. In the case of hitting and helping and sitting and standing, the doer is called fa'il, but kana subject has a special name, you see, and this is going to be part of the 22, so it's going to be our 12th one. Okay, the predicate in a kana sentence will be our 13th one. One of them will go here, one of them will go in rafa, and the other one will go in nasab. Okay, so here's what we start off with. We start off with the book is new, and the example is al-kitabu jadidun. Okay, when kana comes along, okay, so earlier they were called mubtada and khabar. When kana comes along, first of all, the meaning changes. It's no longer the book is new, it's the book was new. And the sentence format changes. Kana's at the front. Al-kitabu has the same ending that it had earlier, but the label changes. We can't call it mubtada anymore because there's a verb at the front. And jadid's entire grammatical state has changed. So it has a different ending than it had in the basic example. So here's the new terms. The subject of the kana sentence is called ism of kana, and the predicate of the kana sentence is called the khabar of kana. Okay? In an inna sentence, and then another governing agent that can come at the beginning of the nominal sentence and change the terms is the particle inna. Okay, now kana is part of a group. It has some sisters and they all do the same thing. It's a group of governing agents. Similarly, we have another group of governing agents called the inna sisters, and there's 13 in that group, there's 6 in that group. You don't need to know what the group are at this stage, okay, because by far inna is the most popular. So if you know enough about inna, that's sufficient in order to begin reading. And then as the sisters start appearing in the text, then we'll tell you more about it. Okay, so here's the basic example. The book is new, starting with mubtada and khabar. Add an inna at the front, so first of all the meaning changes and it creates a reinforcement. So we don't have the book is new, we have indeed the book is new. What was previously called mubtada is called the ism of inna, and what was previously called khabar is called the khabar of inna. Notice the ending on the word kitab here is different. Okay, it has a fatha on the last letter, so it's become a place of nasab. And the predicate is the same ending that I had earlier, but since the label is different, it's gonna add to our number. So we have two, because of the existence of kana, we have two additional usages. One of them is called ism of kana, the other one is called khabar of kana. Similarly, because of the existence of inna and the fact that inna comes at the beginning of the nominal sentence and abrogates it, we have two further usages. So now we're at 15. So from these 4 new ones, we're going to take 2 of them, put them in rafa. The first of the kana and the second of the inna would go in rafa. The ism of kana goes in rafa, it has a dhamma, and the khabar of inna goes in rafa. And the remaining 2, in other words, the second half of the kana structure and the first half of the inna structure go in nasab. So now we have everything here on a single screen. So start from the right side. On the right side in jar, and that category is closed. There's 2 places in the language where an ism will be considered in the state of jar. The first is mudaf ilayh. In other words, the second half of a possessive structure. The only other place in the language where an ism will be considered in the state of jar is if it follows a preposition, and that's called majroor. Okay, now move to the rafa. In rafa, we have both halves of the nominal sentence, mubtada and khabar. We have doer of the verb fa'il. We have deputy doer, the apple was eaten. And then we have the first half of the kana structure called the ism of kana that is in rafa. It has a dhamma on the last letter. The example was kana al-kitabu jadidan. And the second half of the inna structure goes in rafa. Inna al-kitaba jadidun. Jadidun. Okay, and then the remaining 2 would go in nasab. So the nasab category is larger. First of all, the object, maf'ul bihi. Maf'ul bihi is the direct object, Zayd hit Amr. And maf'ul mutlaq is the generic adverb. Example was farihtu kathiran. I became extremely happy. Maf'ul fi is the adverb of time and place. Darab al-yawma Zaydun Amran. Today Zayd hit Amr. So the word al-yawm is answering the question when. So that's called maf'ul fi. Had it been a where example, it would have still been maf'ul fi. And reason and cause is maf'ul lahu. I hit him for the purpose of discipline. Hal is the circumstantial adverb. Zayd came to me riding. Okay, and there's many more examples that can be given, but I'm purposefully keeping it light with the examples. And the second half of the kana structure, the first half of the inna structure, and this concludes the presentation. And let me summarize the major takeaway or the major points from this presentation. First of all, rafa, nasab, and jar do not mean subject, object, and possessive, because that can't be true. The reason is because subject and object presuppose verbs, and there are sentences out there that do not even have verbs. So instead of subject, object, you're going to have other things. You're going to have mubtada and khabar. But then the verbal sentence does not restrict itself on 3 words. It could be much larger because of the numerous types of adverbs. So this causes our number to become larger. Okay, so the total possible ways an ism could be used is 22. But in order to account for these 22, and in order to be able to differentiate between them, what we do not need is 22 different endings, because that would be redundant. Okay, because many of these usages are easily distinguishable by the kind of word it is. Like the word today can only become an adverb of time. It can't become a subject. It can't become an object. So if you see it lined up with another word, and it and that other word have the same ending, that's fine, because one of those words is an entity and the other word is the word today. So the entity would be the object and the word today would be the adverb, not the other way around. Similarly, many of these 22 usages are specific to verbal sentences, and others are specific to the nominal sentence. So if a portion of a nominal was to receive the same ending as a portion in the verbal, that is not problematic because they won't line up side by side. The only problem would be if Zayd and Amr and Zayd hid Amr had the same ending, because at that stage we would not know which of the nouns is the one doing the verb, which of the nouns is the one upon whom the verb is being done. So what we do not need is 22 different endings. What we do need is the bare minimum amount of endings that would allow the removal of all confusion, and that number happens to be 3. So now the only task is to take the 3 states, and we know their names, Rafa, Nasab and Jar, and distribute the 22 usages on these 3 states. So we end up with 8, 12 and 2, and from those 8, 12 and 2, 15 of them have been given in this presentation. And I think I repeated myself a little in this presentation, but since it's so important, I think it's fine. I'm not going to redo it again. I have to create the other presentation, the Mudari one. So if you want to give some feedback on this, go ahead. Underneath the video you can. And you can also watch the 2 training pieces that accompanied the report, and this topic was covered there too. Okay, I think I was a little more passionate in that one, and maybe less passionate in this one, but I guess it's fine. So we'll see you in the second video that will develop the Mudari verb. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.